Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I am back with our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford. Larry,
Good
nice
afternoon.
to have you back.
Yes.
And we will be talking about Larry's article on China and Brazil and BRICs, an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Larry, would you like to brief us a little on your article?
The article on BRICs is that they're trying to, it's a trade bloc of so-called underdeveloped countries as opposed to the developed countries like the United States and Western Europe. And they want to develop a clout within themselves so that they can improve their economies. And one of the things that, if not the major objective of this trade bloc, is to get away from the American dollar and to use local currencies. So for example, in Brazil, they've just signed a deal where China and Brazil will trade in the Chinese yuan. China is Brazil's largest trading partner, with $150 billion a year of iron ore and agricultural products going to China, and somewhere around 70 or 80 billion coming in from China, mostly in manufactured goods. But historically, and since World War II, international trade has been in the US dollar. These programs are to break away from the US dollar dependency and to trade in local currency, which basically means the Chinese yuan. And it's probably not a good thing for the United States, but I can empathize with a country wanting to get away from US dollar dependency, because now they're free to do other things and devalue their own currencies without having it measured against the US dollar. And in a case like, for example, Argentina, which is a basket case of an economy, even though it's one of the richest potential countries in the world, 100 years ago it was one of the richest countries in the world. They're running out of US dollars, so by trading in the Chinese yuan, they're able to keep on going and trade with China. So
didn't China itself also devalue their own dollar, I think more than once?
Yeah, and China uses their yuan to manipulate trade so that their exports are cheaper than they should be. So,
and I like what you said, supposed developing countries, because
yes,
as we know, China is very developed at this point.
And this BRIC, by the way, is political also. It's headed by, there's an international bank which is part of BRIC, and it's headed by a former president of Brazil who was also a Marxist guerrilla back in the day. And they're very much tied in with the BRICs. And headquartered in Shanghai. And again, that tells you all you need to know as to where it's going on the new development banks. So.
And you spoke about that in your article. I believe you called it the New Development Bank, is that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And is there also talks of possibly Saudi Arabia joining this BRICS movement?
Yes, and there's other observer countries wanting to get into the BRIC umbrella of trading. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, they're also starting to trade with China in the yuan against the US dollar. And that Saudi trade in oil on the US dollar has been the bedrock of the US dollar being the currency for international trade. So this is going to lead the United States down a different road. And as a reserve currency, we're able to run up these huge deficits that we've been running, and not too much of an effect yet. But with the devaluation of the US dollar in international trading, it might be chickens coming home to roost in the very near future.
Now, and also President Lula, who was recently elected after Bolsonaro was out, you mentioned in your article he's a Marxist-leaning theory of government. Can you explain a little?
Well, he claims he's never been a Marxist. He claims he's never been a communist. And that could well be, but he certainly, ideology-wise, favors him. He thinks Venezuela and Cuba have great governments. I mean, if a person talks like a duck, acts like a duck, looks like a duck, it probably is a duck. And he's doing all the things that a Marxist communist favors. I mean, he's for distribution so everybody's on the same level of income, and he's for nationalizing certain things. But to me, he's showing by his actions about how he likes Venezuela and Cuba, how he spent one day in the United States and spent 5 or 6 days in China signing 20 trade deals within 3 months of his re-inauguration of this year. And shortly after his return, he welcomed 2 Iranian warships to a port. So he's certainly showing that he's anti-American in ideology, but he's also trying to play the game that not too much, because he values American trade and economy.
Balancing game there, which I think Saudi Arabia is trying to play as well.
Yeah, I think China is rising, and countries are going to hedge their bets.
Now, when we say Marxist leaning, I know Marx's basic idea was that the proletariat or working class would rise up and revolt against
oppression. It's basically oppression.
Are we seeing that happen, or is there any indication that that may happen, or more of a social democratic?
I'd say it's more social democratic, but I mean, Marxism is based on oppression of one group versus another. The original theory was the working class versus the capitalist owners. That didn't fly. It didn't work. It never worked anywhere. So now the Marxists are talking about race and inequalities and all that stuff.
And rising, getting out of poverty, which is understandable, and people don't want poverty, obviously, and education, different things like that. But didn't he also run on anti-corruption and spent some time in jail because of corruption, that very thing?
Yeah. So, as I said, if he walks like a duck, usually is a duck. And, he's a corrupt individual, but he plays to the crowds, and you have to take your hat off to the guy. He rose up from poverty, became a head of a union, workers' union, and is a great speaker and has a loyal following, and preaches a message to the masses, especially the poor, that he's going to raise them up. Great message.
And there was a lot of concern over Bolsonaro's more extremist views as well, so I could see him appealing to the masses. Yeah. So peace through strength. On this podcast, we have some solutions, and you talked about that in your paper. America needs to get back to becoming that shining city on a hill with our values, freedoms, and economic prosperity. How do we get back there?
Well, the shining city on the hill is a throwback to the Pilgrim's Landing in Boston, and it was all about religious freedom in general, and economic opportunity and prosperity. And as we all know, American cities, particularly in cities of Democrat control, are not as prosperous as they used to be, and there's all sorts of crime and filth going on in these cities. And it's going to take some willpower by the political class to solve this homeless issue, which is really a mental issue. 70–80% of all homeless in the streets in the old days would be institutionalized for mental problems. And then, of course, there's the drugs running rampant throughout the city. So the way you got to do it, Lee Kuan Yew was one of my favorite leaders in the 1900s. He took Singapore, which was a sleepy, swampy city on the equator in Asia, and made it into one of the great shining cities of the world. And one of his expressions was, it's not law and order, it's order and law. If you don't have order, you can't have law. And so, yes, we have to have order. The Black Lives Matter, a Marxist group that was running amok a few years ago, we have to stop that kind of behavior.
Burning down businesses
and no arrests.
Not being held accountable.
Thank you. Perfect word.
I absolutely agree with you. And in order, because we, the people, are supposed to be electing representatives who represent us and trust that. But I think there is some lack of moral leadership, too.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Yeah. But politicians are politicians, so, there's only one person to blame for what's going on in the country, and that is us. We have met the enemy, and he is us, or she is us. And we got to vote for people that will do a better job, I guess, of protecting the people.
Well, in your article, you mentioned too, even just one little candle. If we just do one little part, so if each of us can get out and be informed voters.
Yes. Better to light one candle than curse the darkness. Yes.
Well, thank you, Larry. I appreciate your brief on your article. And
Thank you, Joy.
to our listeners, you can read Larry's articles at www.ascf.us. You can subscribe to our newsletter there and stay updated with us. And Larry's also on Substack now as well, so check out, if you type in ASCF, you'll see all of his articles there as well as podcasts. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to and comment on our YouTube and Rumble channels by typing in American Security Council Foundation. Thank you, and join us next time as we talk about China and Canada on our Peace Through Strength podcast.